no matter when and where you speak, people want to be entertained. And by entertained, I don't necessarily mean amused, but they want to be engaged. They want to be interested. And the way you present your message is as important as the message you present. A good message, not well delivered, won't be heard.
Great leaders may not know the answer to the questions, but they know the best questions to ask, says today's Ask an Expert guest. Hi, I'm Joshua Carlson, co-founder of Propello Media, and today I sit down with Mark Sanborn. He is a best-selling author and international speaker on topics such as performance and leadership. And today he's going to talk about some things from how to improve the working relationship within your organization. He's going to talk about how you should focus and rethink your customer experience, and he's also going to share some insights about how to navigate these difficult times that we're facing right now. Let's hear what Mark has to say.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you for coming on our Ask an Expert vodcast.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, so I want to start from out of the gates going way back in time. You're a very tenured speaker at this point in time, but I understand your speaking career began at age 10, where it sounds like you kind of bombed it, but you got the itch and you kept coming back for more. I'd love to hear how that got started.
Well, first, you're kind to say tenured, which is a synonym for really old, but this is my 33rd year, going on my 34th year in the business.
Congrats.
And I really got into the business as a byproduct of entering a speech contest at the age of 10. You're correct.
Okay.
I was in 4-H. I lived on a farm in rural Northeast Ohio. 4-H was the club you belonged to. And my club thought I could handle this safety speaking contest. I had to speak for 3 to 5 minutes on a subject related to safety, and I chose the always popular subject, hunting knife safety.
Okay.
Which I'm sure would fascinate any of our listeners today. And the bottom line is I did so badly and was so humiliated that that's really what got me interested in public speaking. It was kind of reverse psychology. I really think if I'd have done okay, I probably would today be an engineer or a lawyer or some other profession, but I really wanted to learn how to speak. And so I started entering competition. I started studying public speaking. And then at the age of 19, I had been speaking so much for free that somebody actually offered me $150 to speak at a high school commencement. And you got to love free enterprise. That's where my profession was born. I was 27 when I went into the business full time.
Okay. And so tell me about this. I mean, it's such an interesting career. You've spoken, I understand, all across the world. Give me about, from where you're first starting to where you are today, some of the lessons that you've gotten about speaking.
Sure. It's interesting because with COVID-19 now, for at least the temporary or foreseeable future, my profession is digital. There are just not very many, if any, meetings like I typically speak at happening. And depending when your listeners hear this, I think probably 2021 will be the first time, hopefully, we'll see groups coming back together. And it remains to be seen whether we'll see the large 2,000, 10,000 audiences that I occasionally spoke to. Typically, I have to speak to anywhere from 300 to 1,000. And today, all bets are off. So I guess the side note is, as somebody who speaks about leadership and change, I get to really practice what I teach because there's a lot of reinvention going on right now in how we communicate messages. Having said that, historically, I would speak anywhere from 50 to 60 times a year. Here in the U.S., 14 different countries I've had the pleasure of speaking in. And it's really been fun because I'm kind of philosophically ADD. And, there's two ways that people kind of do this business. One is they specialize by topic and the other is by industry. And if I had to always speak to the same kind of audience, pick whatever industry every day, I'd probably get, kind of bored quickly. But I've loved working across so many different professions, industries, market spaces, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,600 clients in the last 33 years. And what I have found is, and this, by the way, will seem a little counterintuitive, maybe not, maybe some people have already figured this out. Everybody thinks whatever it is they do, whatever profession they're in is unique. And certainly every profession does have its specialization, its expertise, but about 85% of the challenges leaders face, regardless of what they do and where they do it, are the same. The
Yeah.
15%, and that's not quantitative, that's just a wild-haired guess on my part. But about 15% really are unique, but you really have to go very deep and be very entrenched in the profession before you ever use that 15%. So it's been a lot of fun for me to work on applying principles across. My wife always gives me a hard time. I'm from Ohio, and we put a T on across. It's across, not across. It's been fun to work across a lot of different professions and apply these principles.
Okay, and I
Oh, by
think
the way, you ask about what I've learned. The big lesson, is no matter when and where you speak, people want to be entertained. And by entertained, I don't necessarily mean amused, but they want to be engaged. They want to be interested. And the way you present your message is as important as the message you present. A good message, not well delivered, won't be heard.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think storytelling is one of the best ways to convey a message that you have. And the art of storytelling is, in fact, an art, right? It is a nuanced approach. And I've seen some of your speeches, and you clearly have developed a good storytelling method. But you're not just a speaker, you're an author as well. And one book that caught my attention is titled Fred. Who I understand was a postman of yours, maybe still is. But I'd love to hear, let's talk about Fred and the lessons learned, or the lessons that Fred revealed to you.
One of the questions I get asked is, where do you find your stories? And the answer is, you pay attention. And I was fortunate because when I moved into my first home here in Denver, Colorado, I met my postal carrier. His real name is Fred Shea. And I wrote a book about the incredible service that he was able to provide. Now, if anyone wants to read the first chapter for free, they can just go to fredfactor.com and they can read what's called The First Fred I Ever Met. And the essence of it is let's just, for sake of time, say that Fred does not have what you would consider a complex, sophisticated job. He puts mail in boxes, right?
Yeah.
And he did it in such a way, was so amazing in building relationships, creating value, and making a positive difference in the lives of the people whose mail he delivered, that I wrote a book about him.
Right.
And he retired 3 or 4 years ago. He's still around, doing great. He's married, has 2 sons, has 2 granddaughters. And Fred basically is a testimony to the fact that it isn't the job you have, but how you do the job that matters. Very often over the years, I've been asked by people, maybe I should get a different job. What job should I get? And sometimes people do need a different job. They're in the wrong place, the wrong company. But I always say, before you get a different job, do the job you have differently. Because if Fred could bring artistry to delivering the mail, then you and I, and everyone listening, really don't have much of an excuse for not bringing more complexity, depth, and artistry to our own work. And the big message of almost all of my books is simply that nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary. You may not have been taught or encouraged or rewarded or recognized for it, but no matter where you are and what you do, and by the way, if you're a parent, please, this is a message you need to share with your kids. Extraordinary is a choice. By the way, you don't have to be, it's a free world. You don't have to be anything. But life, as Helen Keller once said, is 1,000 times too short to bore ourselves. So I think the big message for all of us is every day we wake up and we can either sleepwalk through the day and be ordinary, or find ways throughout the day to be extraordinary.
So I love that message, because I think it's really meaningful. I actually heard you say that in this extraordinary aspect, that we have so much potential inside of us, I feel like is less impacted by those around us than it is ourselves. So what's a way that we can shake our internal mental state to say, whoa, I am stuck in the rut. I am stuck in the mundane. I am being boring. How do we wake ourselves up from that?
Well, when I was about 16, I read this really corny quote. And now at 62, I think it's actually pretty profound. And it's an old bromide. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people hadn't heard. And it says, the only difference between a rut and a grave is distance and depth. And it's really easy to get into a rut and 30, 40 years later, find yourself 6 feet under, never having deviated from that rut.
Right.
I talk about in the book, there's, awareness is the beginning to all change. We can't change what we're not aware needs to be changed.
Yeah.
And so I think that if we just look around us and see not the negative and the bad, there's a lot of that in the news, but if we just look for people who do cool things, and no matter what channel or network you watch,
Yeah.
there's always good news stories about somebody doing something nice or noble or praiseworthy every day. That reminds us that we too, can be more. And in the book, there's two comments that are two principles that I teach. Actually, they're techniques. One is called ABCD, and that stands for above and beyond the call of duty. And I'll just give you a very simple example. If somebody in an office building where you work says, hey, how do I get to suite 203? You could tell them, or you could take a minute and a half and walk them there, and maybe in the process have a brief conversation. Above and beyond the call of duty doesn't have to take much time at all. It's not like somebody says, do you have change for $1? And you put them in your will. That's nonsensical, right?
Yeah.
It's just that you give them, instead of change for $1, you say, what do you need? And if they only need a quarter, you give them a quarter. By the way, quarters are, pretty much doomed, it would appear, change in general. So you might want to start giving away some of that change. I don't save pennies. I don't know if this is, I'm sure it's not illegal. I'm not sure it's prudent, but I always throw pennies on the ground near where kids are, because kids love to find money.
Sure.
And what am I going to use a penny for? I'm going to
Right.
carry it for a week and a half before I get a chance to use it, maybe.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's what ABCD is. It's just looking for a way to go above and beyond the call of duty. My favorite technique I call the one-a-day principle.
Okay.
Now, here's the deal. You can't be amazing for everybody every day. That's silly. Because if you tried to be amazing for every customer, every colleague, every family member every day, you'd run out of time.
Yeah.
The tragedy of life isn't that we aren't occasionally doing something extraordinary, but that we go weeks or months without doing anything extraordinary. So the one-a-day principle says find one person a day to do something very cool for, something they'll remember or talk about at dinner or share with a friend. And so, that makes it attainable, because it could just be, offering encouragement to a coworker. It could be taking time to really inquire into the FedEx or UPS man or woman who delivers your box's life to see how they're doing during this stressful time.
Right.
But, it's those opportunities to choose to be consciously able to choose to make a positive difference in someone's life every day, that, when you add up the days of your life, you can live an extraordinary life just by practicing the one-a-day principle.
I love it. And I love that you used FedEx, UPS, because Fred, right? Fred was the postman. And that has had an impactful life, just not on you, but also for so many people that have read and or heard your message. I want to talk about disruption. We talk about, wanting to be a disruptor in the place. And right now we are kind of in the mother of all disruptions that's largely been outside of our control. So I'm curious what kind of message you have for a lot of businesses out there that have been just so crazily disrupted because of everything that's going on right now. What are some things you think that they should be focused on right now?
I used to always say in my work and in my book, The Potential Principle, I say, either disrupt or you'll be disrupted. And even if you are a disruptor, there are things that come along that are like global waves of change that none of us could dodge, right?
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize that at a personal level, we can be proactive, but at a larger level, the best we can hope for is to be interactive.
Okay.
I think right now, we've got to be surfers. I tried to learn to surf a long time ago. I'm pretty good on frozen water. I'm a good skier, but man, I suck when the water's not frozen. But one of the things I learned conceptually is that surfers don't make waves. They interact with the waves to create the outcome they desire. And those are the kind of skills we need, is how do we interact with this disruption? I did some research during COVID to find out how leaders were doing. And it's a pretty long study, but two big takeaways that I find really interesting. And one is about a third of the people in our survey of over 1,000, which makes it statistically significant, about a third believe life will be better after COVID-19, which shows that human beings are pretty resilient.
Right.
I think one of the challenges of leadership, however, is not just to help deliver for those third that think it'll be better, but to help pleasantly surprise the rest of the people that didn't think life was going to be better.
Right.
I think that's what a leader does. They either reduce the pain that they're people are feeling, increase the joy, or both. And boy, we've got a great opportunity to do that right now because there's a lot of pain in the marketplace. So I think that the first thing we need to understand is there is optimism, but at the same time, not exclusively, but at the same time, people are very anxious.
Yeah.
And so right now, anything you can do to reduce the anxiety of your customer or your employee or your friend or your spouse is going to create great value. And we live in an age now where it's not tell and sell, it's show and tell. And I'll give you an example of that. We've all experienced commitments by either restaurants that were able to stay open during COVID or who were doing delivery, that they were playing by the rules, that their kitchens had upped their game in terms of cleanliness and safety.
Right.
We all told everybody that, but I got a question. I ask sometimes people in my webinars, how many of you have ever been in a kitchen to see if it looked any different than the kitchen looked before COVID? And hardly anyone has.
Right.
I was at Texas Roadhouse, which is a client and a wonderfully successful restaurant out of Louisville, Kentucky. And they promised and practiced social distancing, and their hostess stand was set up outside. But while we were waiting to go in, they had a young woman with a mask and a spray bottle who was spraying everything, including the post that held up the awning and the sign on the post that talked about, the practices that they were undertaking. And I thought, now see, that's what show and tell is.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say it, and we're all skeptical, aren't we? At the end of the day, we go, I don't know, that sounds like BS to me. But when you see somebody out there spraying down the sign that tells you what they're doing, that's a reinforcement that, you know what, nothing's 100%, but you're going to have a very safe dining experience here. And I love that example because it's what I call not tell and sell, but show and tell.
Well, and it fits ABCD, right? I mean, it's one thing to say that we're doing it, but it's another thing to go above the call of duty, because I think it's good from a leadership standpoint, and we certainly need leadership right now because we're all going through a difficult time. And the more that we can all get behind this collectively, the sooner it will be over. And it's that leadership from small business and local community that to me is really meaningful. You've talked about in the past relationships versus transactions.
Sure.
I love this, so I would love to hear you talk about it.
Well, I'm an economist by training, which I probably say more for my own benefit than anybody else's because I find it very interesting. That's what my degree is in, and this is what I do. However, in defense of economics is the study of the allocation of resources, and really life is about the allocation of time and energy, right? So I think at a philosophical level, it's a good background to have. But in economics, we think of transactions as an economic exchange.
Okay.
But a relationship is an economic exchange as well as getting to know your customer. Right. And that getting to know doesn't mean you become besties and invite them over for dinner. It just means that you connect at a human level. I always say a connection is a moment of shared affinity. It's when you find out at a cocktail party that somebody you're talking to, maybe the conversation wasn't going that great, but you find out you both went to the same high school, different years.
Right.
There's a big change because all of a sudden you've got a connection. Yeah. And in a time when divisiveness is at an all-time high, I think we need to look a whole hell of a lot more at what we have in common, not just what we have in different. Or what we have that is different, because it's politics, and I'm not like right now. Not many I think of us are huge fans of the political process, but the practice of politics is it's really hard to hate in person. That is why in a typical campaign, candidates go out and meet people and shake hands because there may be a candidate you just despise his or her platform or their their politics, right? But you meet them, and I've had this happen to me. I've met some arch nemesis politicians, and as soon as I met them, I found myself fawning all over them because they were just so doggone nice, And I think that's what going from a transaction to a connection is. It's adding in that relationship. Sure, we have the economic, part of it, but we also have the relational part of it.
Well, I love that. I was talking to former president of Starbucks, Howard Behar, and I was giving him a question where I said something to the effect of, how do you approach customers? And he stopped me right there and he says, they're people. They're people. And I just love that, because I think if we can break down these labels that we put upon one another, and we realize that, hey, we're just individuals, same as you and me kind of thing, then that will open doors to better relationships and more meaningful relationships.
Well,
'Cause
Josh, let me interject before I
yeah,
forget. It's funny. We've created this kind of weird dichotomy when we talk about business. We talk about customers and employees, or customers and colleagues and
yeah,
vendors, right?
yep,
You know what? Every employee you have is somebody's customer.
yeah.
Every customer is somebody's employee. Every vendor is somebody's customer. And I think sometimes we forget about the overlap, the humanity. Kurt Vonnegut, who's one of my favorite authors, his brother once asked him for advice. His brother was, I guess, an artist, but not a very good one. And Kurt Vonnegut is said to have told his brother, in art, what makes a picture great isn't its pictureness, but its humanness. Now, I've had people try to correct me and say humanity. Vonnegut said humanness, which I like better than humanity. Humanity seems to me a bit sterile. Humanness, we can all relate to. And I think that's what in business, what makes a business great isn't its businessness, but its humanness.
Yeah, I love that too. Humanness. I'm going to use that. So, you have a quote, and I want to make sure I get it correctly here. It's leaders don't know the answer to the questions; they know the best questions. I love this. Could you expand on this?
Well, we all want to know the answers to questions, but the problem is a lot of times they're not relevant. We may know the answer to a question, but it's not the best question. For instance, in my work with clients, the big question in a lot of sales organizations and at C-levels is, are we making our numbers? Are we achieving our goals? And
Right.
that's a good question. We certainly want to attain what we set out to attain, but the better question is, are we pursuing our potential? Because I've never worked with a company, and I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of really good companies. I've never worked with a company that could tell me unequivocally they were performing at their very peak, at their very best. And the problem with achieving your numbers is once you achieve your numbers, you kind of quit trying. You don't give up, but there's what I call the security of the achieved goal. If you make your goals for the year by the end of the second quarter, woohoo, you get the next 2 quarters to kind of just kick back a bit.
Right.
So I always say that the question isn't, are we making our numbers, but are we making our numbers and are we pursuing our potential? I'm a big believer in the and. I think and is a very powerful word because or means you got to choose. And says you get both.
Right.
So questions, leaders challenge, if you're asking the same questions, you're never going to innovate. You've got to figure better questions to ask. It's interesting. The research shows one of the best predictors of whether or not an employee will be with you in 2 years is their onboarding. And by onboarding, we mean the first 48 hours.
Wow.
Now, most people, you come in, you sit down in HR, you fill out a crap load of paperwork, then they put you in they introduce you to your boss, and then they might put you into a little orientation session, and it's all dry and boring. And at the end of 48 hours, you've already started to form an opinion about whether you work at a rock and roll company or you work at an also ran. And so, the question isn't, necessarily how do we find and hire the best people, but how do we onboard the best people so they stay and are engaged while they're there?
Right.
And that playing with a question, I always say, answer your questions, but question your answers. Because the better the questions, the more innovative you'll become.
I love it. So people weren't privy to our initial conversation, but we're both beer guys. So understand you've worked with Lagunitas founder, Tony McGee, who said you are what you did, but you elevated that statement to you will become what you do. Expand on that.
Well, I was reading Tony's autobiography, and yeah, I love beer. They say Ben Franklin said beer is proof God wants us to be happy. He didn't actually say that, but he should have, because I believe it's true. Lagunitas, of course, one of my favorite brands, especially in the early years. I wanted to read. Tony was kind of an iconoclast. He was kind of an outside the box thinker. And
Right.
At the end of his book, I thought it was worth reading the whole book because it was such a simple idea, but so powerful. We are what we did. We are the culmination of everything we've done up until now. But see, the reason I love that quote isn't just because of that, because that means, we're stuck now, right? Because we can't go back and change what we did,
Right.
but we can change what we do going forward. So I'll say you become what you do. And if you want to, you want to lose weight, be healthier, have a better relationship, make more money, whatever it is, you just got to basically change what you're doing so that you're moving towards that and not replicating the decisions and the things that you did in the past. So we are what we did, but we become what we do.
I love it. I love it. It reminds me of what you said earlier about being aware. And it starts with that awareness. And if you can sit down, evaluate it, then you can change who you are to who you would like to become. You said the only way to grow is to grow yourself and then grow your team. And I love this. And I wish I'd learned this, maybe 10 years ago, moving into management, because I think it's a valuable lesson about constantly improving yourself. Expand upon that.
Well, most leaders that hit, a dead end in their career are those leaders who work harder and longer hours to get more done instead of working smarter hours and teaching the people that they lead to be more productive. The only three resources in any business are your time, your expertise, and the time and expertise of your team. All the money you make, all the revenue you produce, all the margins you create come from how you spend your time, your expertise, and the time and expertise of your team. So at some point, if you have a fixed number of hours in each day, if you are not growing your capacity is the ability to produce results, not by working more, but by working better. If you are not growing your capacity or the capacity of your team, you will be limited in what you can achieve. Hence, the only two ways to grow any business is to grow yourself and grow your team. The great irony is that's probably way down on the list of what a lot, if not most leaders do, because they get caught up in the operational end of the doing instead of the learning end of the teaching.
And so what's the process to step back from that to, I guess, self-evaluate and then evaluate the team?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head, but self-evaluation doesn't just mean your strengths and weaknesses. It means you have an agenda for addressing them.
Yeah.
I am a big fan that you never really win big by just overcoming your weaknesses. You win big by building on your strengths. However, having said that, if a weakness is debilitating, if you really are bad at social media and you're in the marketing area, then you damn well better learn how to be a better, marketer using social media. But you need an agenda. And I'll say, what do you most need to learn this year? What do you most want to learn? Because I think learning should be fun. It shouldn't just be obligatory.
Right.
And then you need to say, what is it that the people on my team individually most need to learn? Here's what we discovered, among other things, during COVID-19. Companies that were really specialized, where people didn't know what other people did or how they did it, really came up short. You don't need to be cross-functional in the sense of, in a SEAL team, probably this, Josh, but in the SEAL team, they can all do each other's job. So if somebody gets taken out, somebody else can fill in whatever they were doing.
Sure.
We don't need to be quite that flexible in most organizations, but we need to understand enough about what other people do that if they are unable to do it, at least one or two of us can keep it from bottoming out. We can at least, do a passable job of getting it done. And so I think that's the other thing is we need to ask ourselves, how knowledgeable are we about the processes of our department and our company so that if necessary in times of disaster or plague, we can help fill in.
Well, I love that. And I think that's something leadership really needs to take to heart because I do feel, as organizations scale and they get bigger and bigger, they do tend to get siloed. And if you can break down some of those walls, not physically, but mentally, then I understand I may be a cog in the wheel, but it's a very meaningful cog. And I understand how that other cog works. And that understanding leads to a better customer experience, which at the end of the day, to me, is paramount. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you think is really important where we are at right now today?
First, what you were just saying, though, that knowing what other people do and how they do it also creates something very important. It's called empathy.
Mm,
If there's friction between departments or between people, it's usually because, or at least partly because, they don't understand what the other person's challenges are day to day.
sure.
Right now, I would say that the key thing is to be optimistic, not because you're naive or because you deny the challenges of the day, but to look at what you have left instead of what you have lost. The people I feel the most sorry for are high school graduates, primarily, who didn't get to have the fun of graduating, and secondarily, college graduates. Now, I found my son graduated virtually from Ohio State and was also virtually commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marines. And it didn't bother him that bad. I think it bothered his mother and I more because we couldn't physically be there
Yeah.
to be part of it. However, he had the experience of graduating from high school. He had the party, the celebration, and the relationships. And I feel sorry because it's pretty hard to have planned at the age of 18 for the next 3 or 4 years of your life and to have that rug yanked up from underneath you. I think the rest of us, however, have got enough diverse experiences. What we need to do is ask ourselves two questions going forward.
Okay.
Number one is, what's important now? What's changed? Addressing anxiety and health and well-being and virtual work. Those are all things that are more important now than they've ever been. But don't forget the second question, and that is, what always matters?
Mm,
Service and kindness and relationships and responsibility and discipline and focus. Those principles haven't changed. How we apply them might be tweaked a little bit now, but the two questions to hold simultaneously is, what's important now, but what's always important? Because if you look at both of them, you'll find your way through this uncertain future.
I love it. Good advice. I think that as we look at core values, I think that it's unfortunately too often discarded is the value and the importance of them. But I like that second point, which is what is always important. And if you have to look at your business and those values don't mean what they used to mean, then maybe you didn't have the right values in the first place.
Indeed.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on. I wish you and your family and your recently graduated son the best, and I look forward to having you back on.
Thank you, Joshua. It's been great to be with you. All the best.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed Mark's episode today. A lot of great insights about how we can step up as leaders and how we can individually grow. If you did, hit the like button down below. It really helps us to grow the show and continue providing top level interviews. And then make sure you hit the subscribe button. That way you're instantly notified when our next episode drops. Until then, stay safe and keep propelling your business forward.